The ancient city has a dark secret. However, today this massive structure is in ruins and it's covered by the skulk. And so that leaves us with a mountain of lore left to be uncovered. So in this video, I'm going to be theorizing the backstory of this strange structure and the dark tale of the people that once lived within. Millions of years ago, the overworld was not a peaceful place like it is today. Instead, it was in a state of pure chaos, as there had been a raging war that had been going on for centuries between the dominant species of the land. So what were these dominant species and what were they fighting for? Well, these species were the villagers, the pigmen, the warpers, and the illagers. Now, the villagers, you've probably heard of them. They lived in small villages together and they were very intelligent, but they weren't very strong. However, what they lacked in physical strength, they well overexceeded with their intelligence, as they were able to create powerful mechanical creatures that would attack and defend them. Next up, the pigmen. This strange species wasn't very smart or strong individually. However, when they all worked together, they were very strong and they had an intelligent hive mindset. Also, they lived in the desert temples, as the desert was one of the best places to mine gold at the time, and they just really loved gold for some reason. And the next species competing were the warpers. These were the most powerful species of them all by far, as not only were they very physically strong, but they also had the ability to teleport. Also, they were cloaked in a mysterious purple aura that concealed their identity. And finally, you've probably heard of them before as well, the illagers. But wait, there was something different about this group. As unlike all other dominant species, the illagers were a group of smaller species who had all united under one leader, and that leader was known as the Arch-Illager, and together they formed the most diverse and powerful side of this war. Also, all the illagers specialized in dark magic. So, now that you know the dominant species, here's what was happening all that time ago. As the overworld was starting to form, 4 different species arose, those being the villagers, the pigmen, the warpers, and the illagers, and they all lived peacefully together. That was at first anyways. However, that quickly changed as they all desired something that only one of them could obtain, and that's the complete control of the overworld. And since none of the sides were willing to back down, a war broke out between the species. However, since all the groups were able to counteract each other, no one group was able to fully control the overworld, and as such, this battle would go on for centuries with very little progress. That was until one day, everything changed. The Arch-Illager, the leader of the illagers, set up a meeting with the leaders of the villagers, and they created an alliance that would change Minecraft forever. With this alliance, the illagers and the villagers merged together to create one powerful group, known to us today as the Ancient Civilization. The first thing that this ancient civilization did was that they constructed the largest fortress ever, and it would be from the strong fortress that the villagers and illagers would be able to create mighty new weapons and develop strategic plans to overcome the warpers and the pigmen. But do you know what that large fortress was? Well, it was actually the ancient city before it was in ruins. And so, it was inside that ancient city that the villagers were given the necessary time to create powerful new weapons using their intelligence. And one of those weapons just so happens to be something that we fear a lot today, and that's the subscribe sword. No, it was the warden. They were able to create the warden. But not to worry. This warden that the villagers constructed all those millions of years ago, that was different from the one that we know today. While it may have still been very powerful, it also only attacked those who were threats. And so, after completing the creation of the warden, the villagers developed a plan to take down the pigmen, as they were the easiest target of the two. And so, shortly after, they began their attack on the pigmen. They started out by using the full force of the illagers, along with their new warden. And to the utter shock of the pigmen, they were decimated by the ancient city unlike ever before. Now, the villagers and the illagers didn't just want to erase the pigmen from existence after they'd won the battle against them. So instead, they decided to banish all the pigmen to a new dimension called the Nether. Now, the Nether was actually a failed project that the ancient civilization had made not that long ago, but now they had a great use for it. Also, a great advantage for using the Nether was that it was really hard for the pigmen to escape, so that made it one of the perfect places for the pigmen to be sent to. But moving an entire species armies of pigmen to a whole new dimension wasn't going to be easy. So, to make the transition of moving all of them to the Nether easier, the ancient civilization set up portals all across the world that would allow for the pigmen to go through on a one-way trip to the Nether. And those gateways to the Nether would over time crumble as all the pigmen were forced into the Nether, and they would turn into what we now recognize as the ruined portals. But back to the pigmen's banishment. In the Nether, they started to change. In fact, the pigmen were slowly evolving into what we recognize today as the piglins. Meanwhile, the warpers watched from afar as they saw the pigmen being forced into a new dimension by the ancient civilization, and they were terrified as they knew that they didn't stand a chance against the ancient civilization, especially since it was just so easy for them to overthrow the pigmen. Also, the warpers knew that the ancient city wouldn't be as lenient on them as they were to the pigmen, because they knew that the ancient civilization saw the strong warpers as a bigger threat, and as such it was likely that the warpers would not just be banished, but they would be erased from all of existence. And so, the warpers did the only logical thing they could think to do. They went into hiding. At first, they tried to make temples hidden within the overgrowths of the jungle, and for their safety, they rigged these temples with traps to kill off any ancient civilization explorers who ventured inside. However, that quickly turned out to be a massive mistake, as many of the ancient explorers started to locate the jungle temples from a distance away and then raid them with the aid of the pillagers. So the warpers were forced to do something else if they didn't want to be overpowered from the ancient civilization, and so they needed to go somewhere even more hidden. And it was then that they ventured underground. At first, they created mine shafts, as that way they could gather resources and stay safe. But later, they would move out of these mine shafts, as they used their resources that they mined to create strongholds, and they made these strongholds even deeper underground so that they were even more hidden. These strongholds were a maze of different rooms that the warpers could teleport around in, and it was within these strongholds that the warpers even created their own dimension. You see, the warpers knew that if the ancient civilization ever found them, they would be exterminated on the spot. But they thought that if they had another dimension that they could flee to, then it would be very unlikely that the ancient civilization would follow them in, as they just wouldn't have a reason to. However, there was a slight problem with this, as the warpers would never actually test out this new dimension that they created, as they hoped that they would never have to use it, and that would prove to be their biggest mistake. You see, many years later, the ancient civilization had actually found these strongholds, and they started to raid them, attempting to end the warpers, just as they had predicted. And so, the warpers, not wanting to fight an uphill battle, were finally forced to enter their own dimension. However, this journey to the new dimension was quite a costly one, and that cost came in the form of the loss of the warpers' strong powers, which also caused the warpers to be mutated from strong humanoid warriors to thin, fragile creatures, with the only magic remaining inside them being used up to regain a poor eyesight and a much weaker ability to teleport. And that thin creature is what we now recognize today as the Enderman. And that dimension they created, well, that was the end. Also, all that magical essence that the warpers lost was transferred into a creature that was known as the Ender Dragon. So now, back in the overworld, the ancient civilization rejoiced, as both the pigmen and the warpers had finally been removed, and the ancient civilization could at last rule the overworld unopposed. Or could they? As shortly after the War of the Overworld had been won, a group of evil evokers were experimenting in secret with the souls of lost soldiers, as they were trying to infuse these souls into the warden to create the most powerful weapon to possibly exist, so that way they could overthrow the rest of the civilization and become the true rulers of the overworld. Now, would they actually succeed in that plan? Watch this video to find out.